The lights were blinding. Thousands of eyes were fixed on her. The applause was thunderous, relentless, almost suffocating. To the world, Whitney Houston stood invincible, a voice without equal, a presence that commanded arenas, a woman who seemed born to conquer every stage she stepped on. But that night, as she faced the crowd, Whitney was fighting a battle no one could see. Behind the flawless notes and radiant smile was a storm of doubt, exhaustion, and quiet pain. The crowd believed they knew her story. The headlines thought they understood her struggles. But the truth was far more complex and far more human. What Whitney faced wasn't just pressure or fame. It was an inner war between who the world demanded her to be and who she was desperately trying to protect inside. That night would mark a turning point. Not because of what she sang, but because of what she felt, realized, and chose to confront when the music faded and the silence returned. This is not the story the cameras captured. This is the story of the battle Whitney fought away from the spotlight. Backhand index pointing right, stay with us until the end, because what Whitney faced and how she endured it may change the way you see not only her, but the cost of standing strong when the world is watching. The roar of the crowd rose like a living thing, vibrating through the floor beneath Whitney Houston's feet. From the center of the stage, the lights blurred into a sea of white and gold, washing over faces she couldn't distinguish, voices she couldn't separate. To them, she was everything they had come for: the voice, the legend, the certainty that greatness was standing right in front of them. Whitney lifted the microphone, her posture flawless, her smile practiced but warm. Years of experience had taught her how to command a stage even when her heart felt unsteady. The band waited for her cue. The audience waited for magic. And as always, she delivered. Her voice soared effortlessly, powerful and precise, filling the arena with the sound that had defined generations. Every note landed exactly where it should. Every breath was controlled. From the outside, it looked like another triumphant night, another reminder of why Whitney Houston was untouchable. But inside, the battle had already begun. As she sang, her eyes drifted beyond the front rows, past the glittering lights, past the cheering faces. She felt strangely distant, as if she were watching herself from somewhere far away. The applause that followed each song sounded louder than ever, yet it failed to reach her the way it once had. Instead of joy, it brought pressure. Instead of comfort, it brought weight. Whitney had faced crowds like this her entire adult life. Stadiums, award shows, royal audiences. None of it was new. What was new was the exhaustion that clung to her no matter how much rest she got. The sense that every performance demanded more than her voice. It demanded her strength, her certainty, her silence. Between songs, she took a breath and glanced toward the wings of the stage. Crew members watched attentively, ready to assist, ready to adjust, ready to keep the show moving. The machine around her was flawless. There was no space for hesitation, no room for vulnerability. And yet, vulnerability pressed against her chest. Whitney remembered a time when singing felt like freedom, when her voice was a refuge, not an obligation. Back then, she sang because it filled her with something sacred, something honest. Now, she sang because thousands expected her to, because contracts demanded it, because the world had already decided who Whitney Houston was supposed to be. As the next song began, her voice remained perfect, but her thoughts wandered. She wondered when performing had quietly turned into surviving, when applause became something she endured instead of embraced, when standing on stage started to feel lonelier than being alone. The crowd didn't notice. They never did. They swayed, sang along, raised their hands as if her voice could carry them somewhere better. And maybe it did. But who was carrying her? A sudden wave of emotion caught her off guard. Not sadness exactly, something deeper. A realization she had been avoiding. The crowd loved the symbol, the sound, the myth. But the woman behind it all was tired of fighting battles no one could see and no one asked about. Whitney finished the song and held the final note just long enough to bring the audience to its feet. The applause exploded, louder than before. She lowered the microphone and smiled again, the way she always did. the way she had learned to. In that moment, standing beneath the lights, Whitney understood something that unsettled her deeply. The hardest battle she faced wasn't addiction, criticism, or fame. It was the quiet struggle to exist as herself in a world that only wanted the performance. As the cheers echoed around her, one thought settled firmly in her mind, a thought she couldn't shake. The crowd was watching her, but they had no idea what she was fighting to hold together when the music stopped. When the final note faded and the lights dimmed, the crowd remained electric, chanting her name as if it were a prayer. Whitney stood still for a brief second, absorbing the sound, then turned and walked off stage. The moment she crossed the curtain, the noise softened, replaced by the controlled chaos of backstage. Headsets buzzing, crew members moving with purpose, voices calling cues that no longer included her. Her smile disappeared the instant she was out of sight. Someone handed her a towel. Someone else offered water. Compliments floated toward her. "Amazing show. You sounded incredible. They loved you." Whitney nodded, murmured thanks, moved forward. She had perfected this ritual. Applause in the front, efficiency in the back, silence in between. The hallway leading to her dressing room felt longer than usual. With each step, the adrenaline drained from her body, leaving behind a familiar heaviness. The kind that didn't come from singing, but from holding herself together for hours at a time. Inside the dressing room, the door closed softly. The noise outside vanished. For the first time that night, Whitney was alone. She sat in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection. The makeup was flawless. The hair perfectly styled. The woman looking back at her was strong, confident, unshakable. At least, that's what the world believed. Whitney studied her own eyes, searching for something honest beneath the layers. "How did we get here?" she whispered, barely loud enough to hear herself.
There was no single moment she could point to.
No clear turning point. It had happened slowly, quietly. Expectations piling up year after year. Being praised for her strength while never being allowed to show weakness. Being admired for her voice while feeling unheard as a person. Whitney thought about the people who depended on her success. Managers, labels, promoters, even fans who found comfort in her music. She had carried their hopes for so long that she no longer knew where their needs ended and hers began. Saying no felt impossible. Slowing down felt selfish. Asking for help felt dangerous. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, and closed her eyes. The applause still echoed faintly in her ears, but now it sounded distant, almost hollow. What stayed with her was the pressure, the constant demand to be perfect, grateful, strong. Whitney knew the crowd would remember the show as another victory. Another night where Whitney Houston proved she still had it. But no one would see this moment. The quiet unraveling. The exhaustion that came from fighting a battle without an audience. She thought about her younger self, the girl who sang in church, who felt joy instead of fear when she opened her mouth. Back then, music was connection. It was faith. It was love. Somewhere along the way, it had become armor. A knock interrupted her thoughts. A voice asked if she was ready to leave. Whitney straightened, took a breath, and stood up. In the mirror, the performer returned. The mask slipped back into place effortlessly. "Yes," she said calmly. "I'm ready." But as she reached for her coat, a quiet resolve began to form beneath the fatigue. She couldn't name it yet. Couldn't explain it. All she knew was that continuing this way felt unsustainable. That facing the crowd was easy compared to facing herself. That night, Whitney didn't make a grand decision or a dramatic declaration. She simply acknowledged a truth she had long avoided. The battle she was fighting wouldn't be won on stage. And for the first time, she wondered what it might look like to stop performing for the world and start listening to the woman in the mirror. "I didn't sleep that night." Even after the hotel room fell quiet and the city lights blurred beyond the window, my mind kept replaying the same moments on loop. The roar of the crowd, the silence backstage, the woman in the mirror who looked strong but felt dangerously thin inside. Morning came too quickly. I sat on the edge of the bed, robe loosely tied, staring at my hands as if they belonged to someone else. They had carried me through decades of stages, microphones, standing ovations. Yet now they trembled slightly, betraying a truth I had learned to hide. There was a knock at the door. I almost ignored it. "Whitney." "It's Diane," my assistant called softly. I opened the door just enough to let her in. She paused when she saw my face, no makeup, no armor. People close to me always knew when not to speak right away. Diane set a folder on the table and waited. "There's something you should see," she said. The folder contained press clippings, transcripts, internal memos, whispers that had been following me for months, now louder. Rumors of canceled shows I never approved. Statements attributed to me that I never said. Decisions made for me, then blamed on me when they backfired. My name, dragged quietly through rooms I was never invited into. I felt heat rise in my chest. Why am I only seeing this now? Diane hesitated. "Because someone didn't want you to." That sentence landed heavier than any headline. She left soon after, and I sat alone again, the folder open on my lap. The realization crept in slowly, painfully. The battle I was fighting wasn't just internal. It was structural. Invisible hands shaping my story while I was busy surviving the noise. Later that afternoon, I went to the rehearsal space alone. The room smelled faintly of dust and wood, the echoes of past sessions still hanging in the air. I stood at the center, no microphone, no band, no audience.
Just me.
I sang softly, not to perform, but to remember. The sound filled the room differently, without expectation attached. It cracked once. I didn't stop. That's when I noticed it. A cassette tape sitting on the piano. No label. No note. Just my name written in small, careful letters. My heart tightened. I picked it up slowly, as if it might disappear if I moved too fast. There was no one else in the building who should have been there. I checked the hallway. Empty. I pressed play. At first, static. Then voices.
Mine.
Not singing, speaking. Fragments of private conversations, rehearsals, moments I never knew were recorded. Paired with other voices I recognized instantly, executives, advisors, people who smiled at me every day. They were discussing me like a product. A liability. A brand to be controlled. I felt my knees weaken and sat down hard on the bench. "So long as she keeps performing," one voice said. "She won't ask the wrong questions." Another replied, calm and cold. "She doesn't need the full truth. She just needs to believe we're protecting her." I stopped the tape, hands shaking. My silence over the years hadn't been misunderstood. It had been used. For a long moment, the room felt too small, the air too thin. I realized something then, something terrifying and clarifying all at once. The crowd wasn't my enemy. Fame wasn't my enemy. The danger had been standing beside me the whole time, smiling, applauding, telling me to rest while making sure I never truly woke up. As I slipped the tape into my bag, one question echoed louder than any song I'd ever sung. If I finally spoke the truth, who would try to stop me next? I didn't tell anyone about the tape at first.
Not Diane.
Not my lawyer. Not even the people I still trusted enough to call friends. Once you realize how carefully silence can be engineered, you start guarding your words like they're currency or weapons. But silence has a weight. And mine was getting heavier by the hour. 2 days later, I was scheduled to attend a closed-door industry gala in Manhattan. No fans. No cameras. Just executives, sponsors, and people who liked to call themselves gatekeepers. I almost canceled. Something in my chest warned me not to go. I went anyway. The room glittered with crystal and confidence. Laughter flowed easily, rehearsed and effortless. When I entered, conversations paused just a fraction too long before resuming. Smiles followed me, polished and unreadable. I felt like I was walking through a chessboard where every piece already knew its move. A man I recognized immediately approached me, one of the voices from the tape. His hand lingered on my arm as if we were old friends. "Whitney," he said warmly, "so good to see you. We were just talking about your next phase." My stomach tightened. "My next phase?" I repeated. "Yes," he replied smoothly. "You know how it is. Reinvention. Strategic quiet. The public loves a comeback, but only after enough distance. There it was. Control, dressed as concern. I don't remember agreeing to that, I said calmly. His smile didn't falter, but his eyes sharpened. Sometimes what's best doesn't require agreement. The conversation ended quickly after that. Too quickly. As the evening progressed, I noticed small things. A sponsor who avoided eye contact. A producer who abruptly excused himself mid-sentence. Whispers that stopped when I turned my head. The air felt charged, as if everyone was waiting to see which version of Whitney would show up, the compliant one or the dangerous one. I left early. Outside, the cold night air hit my lungs hard. I stood by the car longer than necessary, breathing, grounding myself. That's when I saw it. A folded envelope tucked beneath my windshield wiper. No name. No stamp. Inside was a single typed page. You don't owe anyone explanations, but you do owe yourself survival. Stop digging. My hands went numb. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't concern. This was a warning. The next morning, the pressure escalated. My phone rang nonstop, meetings rescheduled without my approval, statements released in my name that softened my image, repositioned my narrative. A headline caught my eye. Whitney Houston taking a step back to focus on well-being. I hadn't said that. I stormed into my manager's office unannounced. He looked startled, then annoyed. You should have called, he said. I should have been asked, I snapped, throwing the newspaper onto his desk. Why is this out there? He leaned back, exhaled slowly. Because the truth is bad for business, Whitney. There it was. No softness. No pretending. You think I don't know what you have? He continued quietly. You think you're the first artist to believe the truth would save them? My heart pounded. So you admit it. He didn't deny it. We've kept you protected, he said. From backlash. From yourself. I stood there, shaking, not with fear, but clarity. Protection that silences you is not protection. It's captivity. As I walked out, I realized something chilling. The more I uncovered, the more dangerous my honesty became. This wasn't just about contracts or reputation anymore. It was about who controlled my voice and how far they were willing to go to keep it contained. That night, alone again, I played the tape one more time. Not to scare myself, but to remind myself why I couldn't stop now. Because once the truth is heard, it doesn't go back to sleep. And someone out there knew that and was already preparing their next move. The breaking point didn't come with shouting or slammed doors. It arrived quietly, disguised as an opportunity. I was invited to a private listening session in Los Angeles. No press. No cameras. Just a handful of industry figures and one promise repeated like a lullaby. This is your chance to reset the narrative. Every instinct in me said not to go. I went anyway. The studio was immaculate. Soft lights, leather couches, walls lined with platinum records like trophies of obedience. When I entered, conversation softened, eyes tracking me with calculated interest. They played one of my unreleased tracks. My voice filled the room. Controlled, powerful, flawless. Too flawless. When the song ended, applause followed. Polite.
Strategic.
That's the Whitney people want, one executive said. Strong.
Clean.
Safe. Safe. I felt something inside me harden. What about the Whitney I want? I asked. The room went still. A woman across from me, someone I had trusted for years, folded her hands. That version is risky. Vulnerable artists don't survive long. That's when it clicked. They weren't afraid of my past. They were afraid of my honesty. I reached into my bag and placed the cassette tape on the table. The sound it made against the wood felt louder than any note I'd ever sung. I know, I said, about the recordings, the decisions, the way my silence was planned. Faces shifted. Someone stood. Someone else cursed under their breath. One man leaned forward, voice low. You don't understand what you're holding. I understand perfectly, I replied. I'm holding my life. The woman I trusted looked at me, not with concern, but calculation. If you release that, she said, you burn every bridge you've ever crossed. I met her gaze. Then maybe those bridges were never mine. That's when the truth finally surfaced, not as a confession, but as a threat. You speak, someone said quietly, and you lose control of your career, your access, your protection. Protection again. I laughed, a short, hollow sound that surprised even me. You mean the protection that kept me silent while you spoke for me? No one answered. I stood up, heart racing but steady. You don't own my voice, I said. You just borrowed it for a while. As I turned to leave, the woman spoke again. Whitney, think carefully. Once the world hears you, there's no undoing it. I paused at the door. I've been undone for years, I said. At least this way, it's my choice. That night, alone in my hotel room, I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I felt something unfamiliar, space, room to breathe. I spread the tape, the documents, the notes across the bed. Patterns emerged clearly now. Deliberate delays. Controlled narratives. Manufactured concern. They hadn't just shaped my career, they'd shaped my silence. And then I found it. A memo buried beneath everything else. Typed. And signed. If she ever regains narrative control, disengage immediately. Disengage. I realized then what their true intention had always been, not to destroy me publicly, but to let me disappear quietly once I stopped cooperating. To fade me out. Erase the inconvenient truth by removing the woman attached to it. The fear finally arrived, sharp, cold, undeniable. But beneath it was something stronger. Resolve. I didn't know exactly how I would speak, or when, or who would stand with me when I did. I only knew this. They had underestimated one thing. I had spent my entire life learning how to survive silence. And now, I was ready to break it. I chose the smallest room possible. No stage. No spotlight. No orchestra waiting for my cue. Just a plain conference room in a downtown hotel, beige walls, harsh overhead lighting, a long table with microphones that looked more like witnesses than tools. A few trusted journalists sat across from me. Not the loud ones, not the headline hunters. The kind who listen first. As I sat down, I felt my pulse in my throat. For the first time in years, there was no script in front of me. No approved statement. No safety net. Only truth. I took a breath. The room went quiet in a way that felt heavier than applause. I'm not here to perform, I began. My voice was steady, but softer than anyone expected. I'm here to speak. Pens paused. Eyes lifted. For a long time, I continued. I let other people tell my story. Sometimes because I was tired. Sometimes because I was scared. Sometimes because I thought that staying quiet was the price of staying alive in this industry. I didn't name names. I didn't play the tape. I didn't need to. I learned that silence can look like peace from the outside, I said. But inside, it eats you alive. As the words left me, something shifted. Not dramatically. Not explosively. Just enough to feel real. I talked about exhaustion, not physical but emotional. About being praised while unheard. About being protected in ways that felt like cages. I talked about how fame magnifies everything, including fear, and how easy it is to confuse survival with success. No accusations. No theatrics. Just clarity. When it was over, no one clapped. They shouldn't have. This wasn't a performance. Outside, cameras waited. Headlines were already being written in real time. I could feel the old machinery warming up, ready to spin my words into something safer, smaller. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of that, because something had already changed. Later that night, alone again, I stood by the window of my hotel room, city lights blinking like distant signals. My phone buzzed endlessly, messages of support, confusion, warnings, praise, panic. I set it down. I thought about the girl I used to be, the woman I had been expected to remain, the version of me that survived by shrinking, smoothing edges, swallowing discomfort. And then I thought about the woman I was becoming, imperfect, uncertain, but finally present. The battle I had been fighting wasn't against the crowd. or the industry, or even the people who tried to control me. It was against the belief that my worth depended on being flawless. That night, I understood something with startling calm. I didn't need to be perfect to be powerful. I didn't need to be silent to be safe. My voice had always been enough, not because it could fill arenas, but because it could tell the truth. I didn't know what consequences would come next. Some doors would close. Some alliances would dissolve. I would pay a price for choosing myself, but I had already paid a higher one by not doing it sooner. As I turned off the lights and lay down, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace, not the kind that comes from approval, but the kind that comes from alignment. For the first time, I wasn't fighting a hidden battle. I was standing in it, awake,
Honest. Whole.
and whatever came next, applause or silence, I knew one thing for certain. This time, the voice guiding me
Was finally my own.